A single country just triggered a chain reaction that could quietly choke global trade, and almost no one saw it coming. Germany, Europe's economic engine, is slowing down. But not because of a recession, not because of war, because trucks aren't moving, trains aren't running, and fuel is running out. And here's the dangerous part. These aren't isolated problems. They're colliding right now. Germany sits at the heart of Europe's logistics network. Nearly everything, from car parts to chemicals to food, flows through it. If Germany stalls, Europe slows. And when Europe slows, global supply chains feel it. But over the past weeks, something unusual started happening. Workers began walking out. Transport unions launched coordinated strikes across rail, ports, and trucking sectors. At first, it looked like a routine labor dispute. Wages, working hours, inflation pressure, nothing new. But then, fuel shortages began creeping in. And that's where the story changes. Because logistics systems are designed to handle one shock at a time, not two, not simultaneously. And this double crisis is exposing a hidden fragility most people never think about. At first, the signs were subtle. Freight trains delayed by hours, then days. Containers piling up at inland terminals. Truck drivers waiting longer for diesel refills. Individually, these are manageable disruptions. Together, they start forming bottlenecks. And bottlenecks in logistics are like clots in an artery. Everything behind them starts backing up. Now, here's where it gets worse. Germany relies heavily on road freight. Over 70% of goods move by truck. That means diesel isn't just fuel. It's the bloodstream of the economy. So, when fuel supply tightens, even slightly, the entire system becomes unstable. And that's exactly what started happening. Refineries faced reduced output. Distribution networks slowed. Fuel deliveries became inconsistent. At the same time, striking workers disrupted rail freight, Germany's critical backup system when roads are congested. So trucks couldn't move efficiently, and trains couldn't absorb the overflow. This created a dangerous feedback loop. Less fuel, fewer deliveries, more delays, higher demand for transport, even more fuel strain. And suddenly, logistics companies found themselves making impossible decisions. Which shipments do you prioritize? Which customers do you delay? Which routes do you cancel entirely? Because here's the reality no one talks about. Logistics isn't just about moving goods. It's about choosing what not to move. And during a crisis, those decisions ripple outward. Factories began slowing production, not because they lacked demand, but because parts weren't arriving on time. Retailers faced unpredictable inventory gaps. Warehouses started filling unevenly, some overflowing, others empty. And then came the tipping point. Major industrial players, automotive, chemicals, manufacturing started issuing warnings. Not about profits, about continuity. Because modern supply chains don't break all at once. They stretch, strain, and then snap at the weakest point. And Germany's system is under strain. But the real story isn't just the strikes, and it's not just the fuel. It's how deeply interconnected everything is. Because what's happening in Germany doesn't stay in Germany. Ports in the Netherlands begin seeing delayed arrivals. Polish trucking firms adjust schedules. French warehouses brace for irregular flows. And across the Atlantic, companies in the United States start noticing something subtle. Longer lead times. Not dramatic, not headline-worthy, but enough to signal something is shifting. And this is where most people get it wrong. They think supply chain crises are sudden. They're not. They build quietly, invisibly, until one day everything feels delayed, more expensive, and harder to predict. And by then, it's already too late. But here's the part no one is talking about. The system was already fragile before the strikes began. And that's what makes this moment so dangerous. Because what looks like a labor issue and a fuel issue, is actually something much deeper, something structural. And in the next part, we're going to break it down. Because once you understand what's really happening behind the scenes, you'll realize this isn't just Germany's problem. It's a preview of what could happen everywhere. The strikes didn't break Germany's supply chains. They exposed them. Because beneath the surface, the system was already operating at its limits. For years, logistics networks across Europe, and especially in Germany, have been optimized for efficiency, faster deliveries, lower costs, minimal inventory, everything running just in time. And on paper, it works perfectly. Until something goes wrong. Because when there's no buffer, there's no margin for error. And that's exactly what this crisis revealed. Germany's logistics system depends on precision timing, trucks arriving within narrow windows, rail schedules synchronized down to the hour, warehouses calibrated to handle exact volumes. But when strikes disrupt labor and fuel shortages disrupt movement, that precision collapses. And here's where it gets even more critical. Energy and logistics are more connected than most people realize. Fuel isn't just a cost, it's a constraint. When fuel becomes unpredictable, companies can't plan routes reliably. They can't guarantee delivery times, and they start building inefficiencies into the system just to survive. Longer routes, idle time, partial loads instead of full capacity, all of which drive costs up. And those costs don't stay in logistics. They move downstream, into manufacturing, into retail, and eventually into prices you see every day. But here's the twist. You would expect companies to prepare for something like this. Stockpile fuel, build redundancy, diversify transport modes. But many didn't, because efficiency has been rewarded for decades. Resilience hasn't. And now, that trade-off is being tested in real time. Take rail freight. In theory, it's Germany's advantage: efficient, scalable, less dependent on road congestion. But in practice, it's heavily unionized, which means when strikes happen, rail becomes unavailable almost instantly. And unlike trucks, you can't just reroute trains overnight, so companies fall back to trucking. But trucking depends on fuel, and now fuel is constrained, which creates a system-wide deadlock. And this is the part that shocked industry insiders. Not the strikes, not the fuel shortages, but how quickly the system ran out of alternatives, because redundancy was never really there. Now, zoom out for a second. Germany isn't just any country. It's the central hub of European manufacturing, automotive supply chains, industrial machinery, chemical production, all deeply integrated across borders, which means disruptions don't stay local. They cascade. A delayed component in Germany can halt production in Spain. A missed shipment can delay exports from Italy. A bottleneck can ripple into global shipping schedules. And suddenly, a national crisis becomes an international one. But here's the unexpected angle. Some companies are actually benefiting. Firms with localized supply chains, shorter routes, or alternative energy sources are gaining an edge, because while others struggle with delays and rising costs, these players remain stable. And stability in a crisis becomes a competitive advantage. So what we're seeing isn't just disruption, it's a reshuffling, a quiet reordering of who wins and who loses in global trade. And this leads to a bigger question. What happens next? In the short term, expect volatility, unpredictable delivery times, higher logistics costs, pressure on industrial output. But in the long term, something more significant is happening. Companies are starting to rethink the entire system, not just in Germany. More regional supply chains, more inventory buffers, more investment in alternative transport and energy, because the lesson here is clear. Efficiency without resilience is fragile. And in today's world, fragility is expensive. But there's one final insight most people miss. This crisis isn't unique. It's a pattern. We've seen it with port congestion, with semiconductor shortages, with energy shocks, different triggers, same underlying weakness, highly optimized systems that struggle under stress. And Germany's double crisis is simply the latest example, a warning signal. So, the next time you hear about a strike or a fuel shortage, it's not just a local issue. It's a glimpse into how interconnected and vulnerable the global economy really is. Because behind every product, every delivery, every store shelf, there's a system most people never see until it starts to fail.